Take that cheap toy off your lapel, Mr. Brooks. Parading fake hero badges in my courtroom will not win you any sympathy. The judge's sharp, mocking words echoed through the perfectly silent, oak-paneled courtroom as he pointed his heavy wooden gavel directly at my navy cross. Beside me at the plaintiff table, my sister-in-law, Jada, covered a triumphant, malicious smirk with her perfectly manicured hand. Her expensive designer bracelets jingled slightly in the quiet, tense room. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger or frustration. I simply unpinned the medal I had earned, pulling my men out of an active blast zone, folded my hands on the defense table, and stared right back into the judge's corrupt eyes. What neither of them realized in that moment was that my total silence was not an act of surrender. It was a calculated countdown. Within 48 hours, that arrogant judge would lose his entire career, his reputation, and his freedom, and Jada would be trading her custom-tailored suit for a pair of federal handcuffs. My name is Declan, and I am 34 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who mistook your silent generosity for weakness and expected you to finance their entitlement. To thoroughly understand how my own sister-in-law dragged me into a corrupt courtroom, we have to jump back exactly 3 weeks before that heavy gavel dropped. I had just returned to Virginia after a grueling month-long deployment overseas. I am a former Marine who transitioned into the fast-paced tech sector, eventually founding my own highly successful private threat intelligence firm. My company handles elite cybersecurity and data defense for global corporate clients. My entire professional career is built on anticipating cyber attacks, analyzing massive amounts of data, and neutralizing severe threats before they can cause catastrophic financial damage. Yet ironically, the most destructive threat I ever faced was living rent-free right inside my own home. 5 years ago, I bought our massive family estate to save my late parents from facing total bankruptcy and losing everything they had built. The sprawling colonial property meant the world to them, and keeping it in the family was my personal way of honoring their memory after they passed away. Because my high-demand work requires me to travel internationally on a constant basis, I made a decision that would eventually become my absolute greatest regret. I allowed my 32-year-old younger brother Ryan and his 30-year-old wife Jada to live in the sprawling estate completely rent-free. I paid the heavy monthly mortgage. I covered the exorbitant property taxes. I even handled the basic utility bills and maintenance costs, so Ryan could get on his feet financially. Jada is an African-American woman who built a massive, carefully curated online following as a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer and empowerment coach. To her hundreds of thousands of followers, she preaches constantly about toxic-free living, fierce financial independence, and spiritual growth. In reality, she is the most manipulative, self-serving person I have ever encountered, treating my endless generosity as a basic entitlement and viewing my brother as nothing more than her personal accessory. For 2 solid years, I tolerated her demanding behavior strictly for Ryan's sake. I purposefully ignored the way she redecorated the guest rooms without asking my permission, and I brushed off how she treated the pristine property like her own private country club. But the absolute disrespect I walked into that Tuesday afternoon crossed a permanent line that could never be uncrossed. I pulled my car into the long, winding driveway, physically exhausted from a 14-hour international flight, expecting nothing more than a hot shower and a quiet, peaceful evening. As soon as I stepped out of the vehicle, I heard the jarring, aggressive screech of power tools echoing loudly from the main floor of the house. A massive commercial dumpster sat squarely on my perfectly manicured front lawn, overflowing with wood and drywall debris. I dropped my heavy duffel bag on the front porch and pushed open the heavy oak door. The grand foyer was covered in a thick, suffocating layer of white construction dust. A heavy plastic tarp was taped haphazardly across the original hardwood floors. I walked into the main living room and froze completely in my tracks. The beautiful space had been entirely gutted, but what made my blood run absolutely cold was the sight just beyond the French doors leading to the outdoor patio. My mother's antique cherrywood curio cabinet, a treasured family heirloom that had miraculously survived 4 generations and held irreplaceable memories of my childhood, was smashed into pieces inside the dirty dumpster. The delicate glass shelves were shattered into dangerous shards. The intricate hand-carved woodwork was splintered and carelessly tossed aside like meaningless garbage. In the exact spot where that beautiful cabinet had proudly stood for decades, there was now a massive professional ring light, a bright pink neon sign that read Boss Babe Energy, and a freshly painted geometric accent wall. Jada was actively transforming my family's sacred heritage into a tacky, brightly lit backdrop for her fake empowerment consulting studio. Jada was standing dead center in the room, wearing incredibly expensive athletic wear, loudly barking orders at 2 bewildered contractors who were drilling into the ceiling. Ryan was hovering nervously nearby, holding a clipboard and looking incredibly anxious as he reviewed paint swatches. "What exactly is going on in my house?" I asked. My voice was dangerously low, carrying a cold, sharp edge that immediately made the contractors stop their loud drills and turn around. Jada spun around, not looking guilty or surprised in the slightest, but instantly annoyed by my presence. "Declan, you are home early?" She sighed heavily, rolling her eyes as if I were an inconvenient, annoying guest interrupting her incredibly busy schedule. "You really should have texted us. We are in the middle of a massive brand launch right now. I needed a dedicated professional studio space for my premium coaching clients. So we are just doing some light remodeling to modernize this depressing, outdated old room." "Light remodeling." I pointed a visibly shaking finger toward the large window overlooking the driveway. "You completely destroyed our mother's curio cabinet. You threw a century-old, priceless family heirloom into a trash dumpster." Jada crossed her arms defensively, jutting out her hip with supreme attitude. "That old thing was a complete eyesore, Declan. It gave off terrible heavy energy and totally clashed with my modern brand aesthetic. You are never even here anyway, so I do not see why you are making such a huge dramatic deal out of a piece of junk wood. We are elevating the property value with this studio. You should honestly be thanking me for the free upgrade." I turned my intense gaze to my brother, desperately waiting for him to step up, waiting for him to show a single shred of respect for the parents who lovingly raised us. Ryan swallowed hard, cowardly refusing to meet my eyes. He rubbed the back of his neck nervously, shifting his weight from side to side. "Come on, Declan. Jada's online business is really taking off right now. We desperately needed the creative space. It is just an old, dusty cabinet. Do not overreact and ruin her creative flow today." He was completely brainwashed. A hollow, pathetic shell of the strong brother I grew up playing sports with. Absolutely terrified of upsetting his demanding wife. They stood right in the middle of my house, spending my hard-earned money, destroying my personal property, and acting as if I were the crazy villain for daring to object to their destruction. I did not scream. I did not throw a violent tantrum. I looked at the glowing neon sign, then directly at Jada's smug, intensely entitled face, and I felt a cold switch flip deep inside my chest. The long era of my silent generosity was officially over. I did not raise my voice. I calmly retrieved my phone. I dialed the emergency dispatch number for my own private security division. "This is Declan." I spoke clearly into the receiver, keeping my eyes locked on my brother. "I need a 4-man residential extraction team at my primary estate immediately. We have 2 hostile individuals effectively trespassing. Standard eviction protocols. I want them off the property in exactly 2 hours." Jada let out a loud theatrical gasp, clapping a hand to her chest. She looked at Ryan, expecting him to jump to her defense, but Ryan was frozen in absolute terror. "You cannot be serious right now," Jada scoffed, her voice pitching up. "You are calling security on your family over a piece of wood. We legally live here, Declan. You cannot just kick us out into the cold. I know my tenant rights." "You are not a tenant," I corrected her, my tone devoid of empathy. "You do not have a lease. You do not pay rent. You do not contribute to property taxes. You are a guest who has overstayed her welcome and destroyed my personal property. Your 2-hour countdown began the moment I ended that call." The reality finally registered in Jada's mind. The smug entitlement transformed into calculated rage. She whipped her smartphone out of her pocket and immediately opened her social media app, hitting record. She shoved the phone camera directly into my personal space. "Look at this, everyone!" Jada yelled into her phone, adopting a victim persona. "Look at my abusive, unhinged brother-in-law. I am a hardworking creator trying to build a positive community, and he is attacking me in my home. He is weaponizing his military background to intimidate me. This is what systemic abuse looks like in real time." I did not flinch. I did not try to bat the camera away, knowing any physical reaction would be manipulated against me online. "You have 1 hour and 50 minutes remaining," I stated evenly. Ryan finally broke out of his stupor. He stepped between me and his wife, hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Declan, please, you have to stop this. You are scaring her. Jada is under immense stress with her brand launch. We do not have anywhere else to go tonight. Just give us a few weeks to figure things out. You have plenty of money. You do not even need this house." "My financial status does not entitle you to my assets, Ryan," I replied. "I offered you a temporary lifeline so you could build a career. Instead, you allowed your wife to treat my generosity like an unlimited bank account while destroying the home our parents worked their entire lives to buy. I owe you absolutely nothing." 18 minutes later, 3 black SUVs rolled up the driveway. 4 of my top security contractors stepped into the foyer. They were dressed in dark suits, their intimidating authority immediately silencing Jada's screams. "Escort them to their rooms to pack their immediate personal belongings," I instructed the team leader. "Do not let them touch any fixtures or items belonging to the estate. When their 2 hours are up, escort them to the property line." The next 90 minutes were a masterclass in chaotic entitlement. Jada ran through the hallways, throwing clothes into suitcases while continuing to record herself crying for her followers. She shrieked that she was being thrown out on the streets, omitting the fact she had lived rent-free in a mansion for 2 years. Ryan trailed behind her like a beaten dog, weeping openly. When the clock struck the 2-hour mark, my security team escorted them down the driveway. I stood on the front porch watching Ryan load his car. He looked back at me one final time, his eyes filled with a plea for pity. I simply turned my back, walked inside, and locked the solid oak door. The silence that fell over the estate was profound. I spent the next 3 days hiring a restoration crew to fix Jada's damage. I threw her neon signs into the dumpster and cleaned the dust where my mother's cabinet stood. I thought the worst was over. I assumed taking out the trash meant I could finally focus on my intelligence firm. I was completely wrong. The real, incredibly destructive war had not even truly started yet. Exactly 3 days after the eviction, I was sitting behind my desk in my secure corporate office. My executive assistant buzzed my intercom, her voice laced with hesitation. She informed me a gentleman was insisting on seeing me directly. Before I could even grant her permission, the heavy glass door to my personal office swung completely open. A man in a cheap, wrinkled suit walked in, entirely bypassing my strict security protocols. He dropped a thick, professionally bound legal folder right on top of my classified documents. "Declan Brooks, you have been served," the man stated flatly, turning and walking out. I slowly picked up the heavy manila folder, carefully slicing open the secure seal with my silver letter opener. I scanned the first page, my eyes narrowing as I absorbed the audacity of the claims printed before me. It was a massively inflated civil lawsuit filed directly in the state court. She was officially suing me for a staggering $2 million, citing intentional infliction of emotional distress, unlawful eviction, and severe psychological trauma. But that was not the part that made my blood freeze. According to the fabricated legal filings, Jada was also claiming outright 50% ownership of my entire family estate. Her aggressive lawyer had drafted a complaint, alleging I had made a binding verbal contract, promising her half the property value in exchange for her property management and interior design services. I closed the folder, the corners of my mouth turning down into a hard line. Jada had just crossed from being an entitled squatter to an active threat. And in my specific line of work, we completely obliterate hostile threats. The hearing occurred 2 weeks later. I entered in a charcoal suit accompanied by my corporate attorney, a sharp man named Gregory. We sat at the defense table. The room smelled of old pine. I kept my posture rigid and my face completely blank. In my line of work, revealing emotion is a fatal tactical error. The heavy doors swung open, and Jada made her grand entrance. For a woman claiming severe trauma and financial ruin, she was dressed like she was walking a red carpet. She wore a white designer pantsuit and dark sunglasses that she dramatically removed. A thick gold luxury watch rested heavily on her wrist, and she carried a custom leather handbag that cost more than most working people made in an entire year. Ryan trailed 2 steps behind her, looking utterly exhausted and carrying her extra legal folders like an obedient, terrified assistant. Jada took her seat at the plaintiff table and immediately began her performance. She pulled a lace handkerchief from her bag and dabbed carefully at the corners of her eyes, avoiding her immaculate makeup. She leaned into her attorney, a flashy local lawyer known for chasing high-profile settlements, and whispered with a manufactured tremble in her voice. The entire display was carefully calibrated to project vulnerability, wealth, and absolute victimhood all at once. A sharp voice rang out as the bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Harrison Thorne. The judge strode up to the elevated bench. He was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair and an arrogant jaw. He adjusted his black robe, slammed his gavel down, and glared at my side of the courtroom. The hostility was palpable before a single word was spoken. The proceedings began with Jada's attorney launching into a wildly exaggerated opening statement. He painted a picture of a cruel military veteran who forced a vulnerable lifestyle coach onto the streets. He claimed I explicitly promised Jada half the estate equity in exchange for her brand consulting and property management services. It was an absolute fabrication. There was no verbal agreement, and certainly no property management taking place while she was destroying my family heirlooms for social media videos. Gregory stood and approached the bench. "Your Honor, we have the original notarized property deed right here," Gregory stated clearly. "We also have 5 years of financial records proving my client personally paid every single mortgage installment, property tax bill, and utility invoice. The plaintiff did not contribute a single cent to the estate. This lawsuit is entirely baseless." Gregory held out the stack of hard evidence. Any rational judge would have looked at the deed, seen my name as the sole proprietor, and dismissed the verbal contract claim immediately. Judge Thorne did not even reach for the file. "I sustain the plaintiff's objection to these documents," Judge Thorne snapped, waving his hand dismissively at Gregory. "We are not here to drown the court in endless financial spreadsheets today. We are here to determine if an equitable promise was made and subsequently breached by your client." Gregory blinked, clearly taken aback by the blatant disregard for procedural law. "Your Honor, the defense has not even raised an objection yet. Furthermore, this deed is the foundational document of the property in question." "I said I am not looking at it right now, Counselor." Thorne barked, his face flushing red with sudden anger. "Do not question my courtroom management. The plaintiff claims a verbal contract was established, and given the fact that she resided on the premises for 2 years, I find sufficient preliminary merit to hear her claim." Jada let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. She looked over at me, flashing a brilliant, malicious smile that completely contradicted her previous weeping. Ryan kept his head down, staring at the table, refusing to acknowledge the legal theft his wife was attempting to execute. I remained entirely motionless. I sat back, tuning out the relentless legal jargon, and shifted my brain into active threat analysis mode. In cyber intelligence, you are trained to read beyond obvious surface details. You look for hidden variables. I watched Judge Thorne carefully studying his micro-expressions. I noticed how his eyes kept darting toward Jada's attorney, seeking silent confirmation before ruling. I observed the slight nod Thorne gave Jada when he sustained another ridiculous objection. When Gregory attempted to submit high-resolution photographs of the destroyed antique curio cabinet to prove Jada was damaging the estate rather than improving it, Thorne aggressively struck the evidence from the record. He claimed the photographs were highly prejudicial and completely irrelevant to the verbal equity agreement. It was a staggering display of judicial misconduct. A cold realization washed over me. This was not just a lazy judge making a poor decision or a biased magistrate being swayed by a crying woman. The coordination was far too smooth. The immediate rejection of indisputable evidence was too aggressive. Thorne was actively protecting Jada. He was intentionally steering the hearing to ensure her absurd claims survived long enough to legally freeze my assets. I analyzed the power dynamic playing out in front of me. Jada was running a fraudulent lifestyle business. Thorne was a judge with absolute authority in this county. Why would a man with that much local power risk his seat on the bench to protect a 30-year-old internet scammer? The math simply did not add up. People only take massive risks when there is a massive hidden incentive. There was a dark connection between my sister-in-law and Judge Harrison Thorne. I tapped my pen twice against the defense table, a subtle signal to Gregory to stop arguing. He backed down and sat. Let the judge talk. Let him build his false narrative. The more Thorne spoke, the more data he gave me to analyze. I was no longer fighting a civil lawsuit. I had just uncovered a coordinated hostile operation, and I knew exactly how to dismantle it. I leaned back slightly in my chair, keeping my eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding before me. Jada's attorney called her to the stand, and she walked to the witness box with the practiced grace of a seasoned performer. She placed her hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the whole truth, an oath she immediately violated the second she opened her mouth. Her voice trembled perfectly as she spun a horrific fabricated tale of my supposed aggression. She testified that I used psychological warfare tactics from my military background to actively terrorize her inside the home. She claimed I stalked her through the hallways, aggressively blocked doors, and used my physical presence to trap her in rooms while screaming threats. None of it happened. I had barely spent 72 total hours in that house over the past 2 years. But her attorney led her through the lies with seamless precision. The outright perjury was staggering. Ryan sat at the plaintiff table, staring down at his expensive leather shoes, completely unwilling to look up and hear his wife lie under oath about his own brother. I listened to Jada detail a completely fictional event where I supposedly trapped her in the kitchen and threatened her physical safety. She turned to the gallery, making sure the local reporters in the back row caught her tears. Then she pointed a shaking finger directly at me. She claimed my military service had left me dangerously unhinged and that I weaponized my combat experience against a helpless woman. It was a vile character assassination designed to ruin my corporate reputation. My attorney Gregory tensed beside me furiously, scribbling notes on his legal pad, desperate to object, but I placed a firm hand on his forearm, signaling him to stand down. Judge Thorne leaned forward, his elbows resting heavily on the elevated oak bench. He narrowed his eyes, zeroing in on my dark charcoal suit. His gaze did not land on my face. It locked entirely onto the small, dark blue and white ribbon pinned precisely to my left lapel, the Navy Cross. It is the second highest military decoration awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. I did not wear it for vanity. I wore it out of profound respect for the 3 men I pulled from a burning transport vehicle after an improvised explosive device detonated directly under our convoy. I wore it for the men who did not make it home. It was a quiet, personal reminder of the absolute worst day of my life. A day that taught me how to remain entirely cold and calculating when everything around me was quite literally burning to the ground. The judge gripped his heavy wooden gavel, his knuckles turning white as his face contorted into a mask of pure condescension. He pointed the handle of the gavel directly at my chest, his voice echoing loudly through the silent, tense room. "Take that cheap toy off your lapel, Mr. Brooks. Parading fake hero badges in my courtroom will not win you any sympathy." The words hit the heavy air like a physical shockwave. A sharp collective gasp echoed from the gallery behind me. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a fraction of a second, her hands freezing over her steno machine in absolute disbelief. Disrespecting a decorated veteran in an open court of law was an unprecedented violation of judicial decorum. It was a disgusting, unprompted attack meant to humiliate me and establish absolute dominance. I looked at Jada. She had dropped the crying victim act completely. A triumphant, malicious smirk spread across her face. She practically radiated sheer joy, believing she had successfully broken me. She thought having a corrupt judge openly humiliate me was the ultimate victory. She thought she had stripped away my dignity. I turned my attention back to Judge Thorne. I did not glare. I did not clench my jaw or raise my voice in righteous anger. Any emotional outburst would be used instantly to validate Jada's false claims of my unstable aggression. Instead, I reached up with slow, deliberate precision. I unclasped the backing of the Navy Cross. I carefully removed the small metal pin from my lapel, held it tightly in my palm for a brief moment, and placed it gently onto the defense table. Gregory leaped out of his chair, completely outraged by the blatant disrespect. "Your Honor, that is a highly decorated military honor, not a prop. You have absolutely no right to demand its removal." I was furious, ready to risk a contempt charge to defend my honor. I stood up smoothly, placing my hand firmly on his shoulder, and forced him back into his seat. "I do not need a piece of metal to know what I did," I whispered sharply into his ear, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Let him dig his own grave. Do not interrupt him." Gregory swallowed hard, his face flushed with anger, but he nodded and remained silent. I sat back down, folding my hands neatly in front of me, projecting absolute calm. Feeling immensely satisfied with my apparent submission, Judge Thorne cleared his throat and delivered his final blow. "Due to the compelling preliminary testimony provided by the plaintiff, I am granting a temporary restraining order against the defendant. Furthermore, to prevent the illegal liquidation of contested assets, I am ordering an immediate comprehensive freeze on all personal and business financial accounts belonging to Declan Brooks, pending a full investigation into the equity agreement." Thorne slammed his gavel down with unnecessary force. Court is adjourned. The room erupted into frantic murmurs. Jada stood up, adjusting her designer jacket, completely victorious. She had taken my home, publicly humiliated my service, and legally locked away my entire financial empire. Or at least that is exactly what I wanted them both to believe. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They did not realize I had just locked the door from the inside. I pushed through the heavy brass doors of the courthouse, stepping out into the blinding afternoon sun. The oppressive heat of the Virginia summer hit me instantly, but it was nothing compared to the fiery rage radiating from Gregory. My attorney was practically vibrating with anger as we walked briskly down the concrete steps toward the waiting black SUV. He gripped his premium leather briefcase so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He was already dictating an emergency appeal strategy into his smartphone, his voice sharp and incredibly frantic. "This is a complete miscarriage of justice, Declan," Gregory snapped, ending his voice memo and turning to me as my driver opened the car door. "Thorne's ruling is entirely illegal. He cannot freeze your corporate assets based on a flimsy verbal claim from a sister-in-law with zero financial standing. I am filing an emergency injunction with the appellate court the second I get back to my office. We will have that corrupt judge investigated by the Judicial Oversight Committee before the end of the week. He will not get away with disrespecting your military service or stealing your company." I slid into the leather back seat of the SUV, my expression remaining perfectly neutral. I waited for Gregory to get in and shut the heavy door, sealing us inside the soundproofed cabin. I looked at him calmly. "Do not file an appeal, Gregory." Gregory stared at me as if I had suddenly lost my mind. "Excuse me, Declan. They just legally hijacked your entire financial life. You cannot just sit back and accept a completely fabricated temporary restraining order." I said, "Do not appeal." I repeated, my voice low and authoritative, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Appealing means we play by his rules. Appealing means we fight this in a courtroom where he holds all the cards and controls the false narrative. I do not play rigged games. If Judge Thorne wants to abuse his power to protect Jada, we are going to let him feel invincible. We are going to let them both believe they have entirely destroyed me. Cancel the injunction. Let them dig their own graves." The drive back to my corporate headquarters was completely silent. I did not waste energy being angry. Anger is an incredibly useless emotion when you are preparing for a targeted strike. In my line of work, we thrive in the absolute shadows. We let the enemy get entirely comfortable, let them expose their critical vulnerabilities, and then we strike with absolute devastating precision. My personal bank accounts and my direct corporate equity might be temporarily frozen on paper, but my physical intelligence network was entirely operational. Thorne could freeze my money, but he could not freeze my mind, and he certainly could not freeze my highly trained employees. The SUV pulled up to the heavily fortified unmarked glass building that housed my private threat intelligence firm. I bypassed the standard lobby and took the private executive elevator straight down to the sub-level operations center. The steel doors slid open to reveal a sprawling, dimly lit room dominated by massive digital displays humming server racks and rows of sleek workstations. This was the absolute nerve center of my empire. It was a highly secure location where global cyber threats were dismantled daily by the sharpest technical minds in the private sector. Today, that massive digital artillery was pivoting entirely toward domestic targets. I walked directly to the center of the room and clapped my hands once. The sharp sound cut through the low hum of cooling fans and the rapid clattering of mechanical keyboards. "Listen up!" I called out, my voice projecting clearly across the expansive floor. "I need the Alpha team in the glass room right now. Drop whatever corporate contracts you are currently monitoring. We have a highly classified immediate priority internal operation." Within 60 seconds, my top 3 forensic data analysts were seated around the sleek conference table in the soundproof glass room. Elena, my lead financial forensics expert, opened her secure laptop. Beside her sat Jax, a former intelligence agency operative who specialized in deep web behavioral analysis, and Nora, a legal database architect who could trace a single fraudulent document through a maze of international shell companies in mere minutes. "What is the target, boss?" Elena asked, her fingers already hovering over her keyboard, completely unfazed by the sudden shift in operations. I activated the large digital monitor on the wall and uploaded 2 high-resolution photographs. One was a screenshot of Jada's aggressively pink lifestyle brand logo. The other was a formal portrait of Judge Harrison Thorne. "We are launching a full-scale unrestricted digital forensic sweep on both of these individuals," I instructed, tapping the heavy glass screen. "The target on the left is Jada Brooks. She operates an online empowerment consulting firm. I want every single digital footprint she has ever left. Trace her server hosting, pull her hidden follower analytics. I want a complete map of every dollar flowing in and out of her payment portals. Find out who is actually funding her lavish lifestyle." Jax nodded, instantly diving into the deep web search parameters. "The target on the right is Judge Harrison Thorne," I continued, my voice hardening. "He just issued a highly illegal asset freeze against me in state court to protect Jada. A local county judge does not risk his entire pension and public reputation to cover for a 30-year-old internet influencer, unless there is a massive hidden financial incentive. I want Thorne's entire life digitally dissected. I want his property records, his offshore vacation rentals, his anonymous campaign donations, and his hidden family trusts. Track his encrypted communications. Find the direct bridge between her fake business and his corrupt courtroom." The team did not ask unnecessary questions. They thrived on dismantling incredibly complex puzzles. For the next 6 hours, the glass room became a high-speed digital war room. I paced the floor, watching the massive monitors as thousands of lines of code and data were pulled, decrypted, and rapidly sorted. We used proprietary military-grade algorithms designed to hunt international terror networks to sift through Jada's public social media presence. The very first red flag appeared shortly after midnight. "Declan, you really need to see this right now," Elena called out. Her eyes narrowed fiercely at her glowing screen. I isolated the revenue streams for Jada's empowerment coaching business. The entire brand is a complete facade. She has thousands of individual digital transactions coming in every single month, but they are not coming from genuine coaching clients. The IP addresses for 90% of her supposed customers are routing directly through a single heavily encrypted server farm based out of Cyprus. "She is spoofing her digital income," Jax chimed in, projecting a highly complex financial web onto the main glass screen. "But it goes much deeper than fake internet engagement. The actual money entering her physical bank accounts is entirely real. Someone is intentionally funneling massive amounts of untraceable capital into her business, under the strict guise of individual lifestyle consulting fees. Once the dirty money hits her LLC, she immediately transfers it to a secondary property management shell company to wash it. And here is the absolute kill shot, Nora interrupted, pulling up a highly restricted corporate registry document she had just managed to crack open. That secondary property management shell company, it does not legally manage a single physical building. It is a total ghost corporation. But I just traced the ultimate beneficial owner through 3 separate layers of international blind trusts. Nora hit a rapid sequence of keys, and a heavily redacted tax document appeared on the main wall monitor. She ran a quick, aggressive decryption script, pulling away the heavy black bars to reveal a single glaring signature at the bottom of the page. The name listed as the ultimate beneficiary of the offshore trust was Harrison Thorne. The entire room fell completely dead silent. The glowing data on the screen painted a terrifying, absolutely undeniable picture. My toxic sister-in-law was not just an entitled narcissistic squatter trying to steal my family home. She was an active, high-level financial money mule. And Judge Thorne was not just a biased, arrogant local magistrate trying to ruin my reputation. He was intentionally using his immense power from the judicial bench to entirely protect his own illegal financial pipeline. We had not just uncovered a petty civil dispute over a piece of property. We had just stumbled headfirst into a massive, highly organized criminal financial syndicate. I stared at the judge's clear signature on the digital screen, a slow, incredibly dangerous smile finally spreading across my face. They thought they were being smart by trying to steal my estate to wash more of their dirty cash. Instead, they had just handed me the exact blueprint to tear down their entire criminal empire. I did not look away from the glowing wall monitor. The sheer scale of the operation was breathtaking, but it was incredibly sloppy. Criminals who think they are untouchable always leave a digital trail a mile wide. I turned to Elena. I need to know exactly where the initial capital is coming from. If the coaching clients are fake, whose money is actually entering the Cypress server farm before it gets washed through Judge Thorne's ghost corporation. Elena's fingers flew across her mechanical keyboard, isolating the payment gateways linked to Jada's aggressively pink website. "Give me 5 minutes," she muttered, her eyes locked on the rapidly scrolling data. Jax and Nora immediately deployed our proprietary decryption software to bypass the secondary firewalls. The room hummed with intense, focused energy. I paced behind them, analyzing the emerging patterns on the main screen. "Got it," Elena announced, her voice entirely devoid of its usual technical excitement. She sounded sick. "Declan, this is not just a standard corporate money laundering pipeline. It is a highly aggressive, deeply predatory pyramid structure. Look at the origin accounts for these incoming transfers." She projected a new complex web onto the glass wall. Thousands of small individual banking nodes appeared glowing bright red against the dark digital map. "They are not fake bot accounts," Jax clarified. "They are real people, almost entirely women. Jada is running a massive illegal Ponzi scheme hidden behind the facade of female empowerment. She uses her viral social media presence to target vulnerable, financially insecure women, single mothers, recent divorcees, and women looking for a way out of debt. She promises them complete financial independence if they buy into her exclusive Inner Circle wealth-building seminars. The buy-in is $5,000 per person. And it does not stop there," Nora added, pulling up a series of devastating internal communications. "Once they pay the initial fee, Jada heavily pressures them to recruit 3 more women into the network to unlock the supposed secret investment portfolio. She takes the money from the new recruits to pay tiny fractional dividends to the older members, creating the absolute illusion of legitimate profit. But 90% of the actual cash goes straight into her personal accounts to fund her expensive designer lifestyle, and the rest is aggressively funneled into Judge Thorne's offshore trust to clean the stolen capital." I stared at the thousands of glowing red dots on the screen. Each dot represented a real woman who had been utterly destroyed by my sister-in-law's greed. Jada was sitting in my family home recording videos about toxic-free living while actively draining the life savings of desperate people who implicitly trusted her. It was repulsive. My brother Ryan was living comfortably off the stolen money of struggling single mothers. He knew exactly what she was doing. He was entirely complicit in ruining lives just so he did not have to get a real job. Package everything, I ordered. I want every single transaction heavily encrypted and safely downloaded to a secure external hard drive. Build a flawless, airtight legal dossier. Compile the victim names, the communication logs, the IP routes, and the direct bank transfers tying Jada to Thorne. I want enough irrefutable federal evidence to ensure they never see the outside of a maximum security prison cell. Just as Elena initiated the massive data compilation protocol, my encrypted corporate smartphone buzzed violently in my suit pocket. The caller ID flashed a priority red alert. It was my senior vice president of public relations. He rarely called me directly, unless a major international client was threatening to terminate a massive contract or a severe corporate crisis was actively unfolding in real time. I answered on the first ring. Go ahead. Declan, where are you right now? He asked, his normally smooth, practiced voice tight with genuine, unfiltered panic. Are you watching any social media feeds today? I am in the sub-level operations center running an internal forensic sweep, I replied sharply. Tell me exactly what the situation is. You have a massive domestic crisis on your hands, he stated quickly. It is a highly coordinated digital smear campaign, and it is spreading like absolute wildfire. Your sister-in-law just went completely nuclear on every major video platform. She posted heavily edited security footage of your extraction team escorting her off the estate. She has spliced the video with a series of frantic, sobbing testimonials. She is loudly claiming you are an unhinged, violent military veteran suffering from severe psychological issues who violently attacked a minority woman in her own home. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, immediately calculating the structural damage to my firm. How bad is the spread? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. It is currently the #1 trending topic in the entire country, he replied grimly. She clearly bought massive bot farms to aggressively push the algorithm. It has over 10 million views across 3 different platforms. Major news outlets are already picking up the story. We have corporate clients blowing up our switchboards right now, threatening to pull their cybersecurity contracts because they absolutely refuse to be associated with an unstable executive. Jada thought she was brilliant. She knew the preliminary injunction and the frozen assets would not be enough to break my spirit. She was actively trying to destroy my corporate empire and turn public opinion against me before I could even fight back in court. She wanted me to panic. She wanted me to beg for a settlement just to save my company's stock price. She was trying to force a swift surrender. Do not issue a press release, I commanded, staring at the hard drive downloading the absolute proof of Jada's federal crimes. Do not engage. Tell our board of directors I am handling the situation personally. Let Jada have her viral moment. I hung up the phone and turned back to the glowing data map. The trap was set. The digital trap was officially set. But before the steel jaws could snap shut on her operation, Jada's digital poison began to seep into the foundations of my actual life. By the time I left the subterranean operations center and stepped into the executive boardroom the following morning, the situation had escalated to a raging 5-alarm fire. The massive flat screen in the boardroom was already playing the viral footage on an endless looping cycle. I stood at the head of the long mahogany table watching my sister-in-law execute a masterclass in digital character assassination. The video was a violently chaotic, heavily manipulated piece of fiction. Jada had taken the security footage from the eviction and sliced it together with dark, menacing background music. She intentionally removed the audio of my calm instructions to my security team. Instead, she layered over audio clips of herself hyperventilating and crying out in absolute terror. The captions flashing across the bottom of the screen were designed for maximum algorithmic outrage. They claimed I was a deeply disturbed military veteran suffering from severe untreated combat trauma. She stared directly into her smartphone camera, loudly declaring that I had used specialized tactical warfare methods to violently assault a marginalized woman in her own sanctuary. It was a spectacular lie. But on the internet, truth is entirely irrelevant when a lie is highly entertaining. The comment section beneath the video was a rapidly scrolling river of pure hatred. People were calling for my immediate arrest. Others were actively doxing my corporate headquarters, demanding massive public protests outside the building. The heavy glass doors to the executive suite swung open, and the 5 senior members of my corporate board of directors filed into the room. They looked absolutely terrified. Richard, the chairman of the board, was practically sweating through his tailored suit. He threw a thick stack of printed financial reports onto the table with an aggressive smack. "Declan, we have a catastrophic situation on our hands." Richard started, his voice completely devoid of any formal pleasantries. "That video hit 10 million views at midnight. It is currently sitting at 25 million. The major global news syndicates have already picked it up. We have been fielding frantic phone calls since 4 in the morning. 3 of our largest international banking clients have officially paused their cybersecurity contracts pending an internal review of your mental stability. Our federal defense sector partners are demanding immediate reassurance that our chief executive officer is not an unhinged violent liability." I kept my eyes on the looping video. "They are reacting to an artificial panic," I stated calmly. "My psychological evaluations are heavily documented and perfectly clear." "The public does not care about your medical documents," Richard snapped, pointing a trembling finger at the television screen. "They care about the horrible optic of a massive, intimidating military veteran allegedly terrorizing a crying lifestyle influencer on camera." Our stock price plummeted 12% at the opening bell this morning. We are bleeding millions of dollars in market valuation every single hour. This video remains unaddressed." The other board members nodded in frantic agreement. A woman named Sarah, our chief financial officer, leaned forward, her expression tight with intense anxiety. "Declan, you are the face of this intelligence firm. We cannot sell stability when our CEO is going viral as a domestic terrorist. The board has held an emergency vote prior to this meeting. We are formally demanding that you settle this ridiculous civil lawsuit immediately." I slowly turned my attention directly to Sarah. "Define settle." Richard stepped in, his tone shifting from panic to authoritative demand. "You give her whatever she wants. You sign over the 50% equity in that family estate. You cut her a check for the $2 million she is claiming in damages. And most importantly, you issue a highly visible public apology statement on all of our corporate channels. You tell the world you suffered a brief trauma response due to your military service and that you are seeking immediate professional help. If you do that, she deletes the video and we save this company from total financial ruin." I stared at Richard, my face hardening into a mask of absolute, unyielding coldness. The silence in the boardroom stretched out, becoming incredibly heavy. "You actually want me to hand $2 million and half of my deceased parents' estate to a woman who is actively trying to destroy me?" I finally said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "You want me to publicly admit to a violent assault that never happened and falsely weaponize combat trauma just to appease a mob of internet strangers?" "It is the cost of doing business," Richard argued, crossing his arms defensively. "Take the financial hit and save the firm. If you do not settle by the end of the business day, the board is prepared to formally initiate a vote of no confidence and remove you from your own company." I did not blink. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my encrypted smartphone, and placed it gently on the polished mahogany table. "I am not settling," I stated firmly, leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "I will not pay a single cent of extortion money. I will not apologize for protecting my own property. And I will certainly never disgrace the uniform I wore by falsely claiming combat trauma just to save a temporary stock valuation." "You are going to lose everything, Declan," Richard countered. "The clients will leave." "Let them leave," I shot back, my voice rising just enough to command the entire room. "Any client who severs a high-level security contract based on an edited social media video lacks the critical analytical skills required to partner with this firm. Anyway, if you want to vote me out, hold the vote right now. But until I am legally removed from this building, my exact orders stand." I turned my back on the terrified board members and walked straight toward the heavy glass doors. "What exactly are your orders?" Sarah called out, her voice shaking slightly as I grabbed the metal door handle. "You will issue no public statements," I commanded without looking back. "You will ignore every single media inquiry. You will let the stock price bleed. I am going straight back down to the sub-level operations center. The only thing this company is focusing on for the next 48 hours is entirely tracking Jada's stolen money. Let her temporarily have the internet. I am taking her actual freedom. I stepped off the private executive elevator and strode directly back into the dimly lit sub-level operations center. The chaotic panic of the boardroom above felt like a completely different universe. Down here, the air was cool. The server racks hummed with steady precision, and my alpha team was exactly where I left them, ruthlessly dismantling the financial life of the woman trying to destroy my reputation. I walked straight into the soundproof glass room. "What is the latest status on the offshore trust connection?" I asked, pulling up a steel chair next to Elena. "The corporate board is currently having a collective meltdown over the viral video, so I need the absolute killing blow ready to deploy." Elena did not look away from her dual monitors. "We dug much deeper into the specific mechanics of the ghost corporation you asked us to monitor. The initial connection we found earlier was just the surface layer. I started tracking the exact business expenses Jada claims on her official tax filings for her empowerment coaching firm. Her absolute largest monthly expenditure by a massive margin is commercial rent." She brought up a heavily redacted digital ledger on the main glass screen. "Jada claims she pays $40,000 a month for a premium virtual office space and an exclusive commercial recording studio." I crossed my arms, staring at the staggering number glowing on the screen. Jada was living rent-free in my house for 2 entire years. She did not have a commercial recording studio. She had a cheap pink neon sign and a ring light set up in my mother's destroyed living room. "Exactly," Jax chimed in, leaning forward and tapping his pen against the desk. "So we track those massive monthly rent payments. Every single month, $40,000 is wired directly from her business account to a property management firm called Apex Holdings. But Apex Holdings does not own a single commercial building in the entire state of Virginia. They do not have a physical office. They do not have any actual employees. It is a phantom real estate company," Nora added, typing rapidly to pull up the corporate registration files. We finally broke through the last 3 layers of their digital shell structure. Apex Holdings exists entirely on paper. Its sole purpose is to receive the stolen funds from Jada's illegal Ponzi scheme under the completely legal guise of commercial rent. Once the dirty money hits the Apex accounts, it is immediately transferred offshore. "And that offshore trust is the one we confirmed is controlled by Judge Harrison Thorne," I stated, piecing the final mechanical layers of the operation together. "Hi is not just protecting her from the bench, he is actively in business with her. He is doing a lot more than just protecting her, Declan," Jax said, his expression turning incredibly serious. "He is her primary handler. We analyze the financial flow. Thorne takes a massive 70% cut of everything Jada steals from those vulnerable women online. In exchange, he provides her with an absolute legal shield in the local jurisdiction. If anyone ever tries to sue Jada for fraud, the civil case inevitably lands in his county courthouse, and he immediately dismisses it with prejudice." It was an incredibly lucrative, perfectly insulated criminal pipeline, but one glaring question still remained. I leaned closer to the glowing digital map connecting the massive web of stolen money. If their digital money laundering pipeline is already so highly successful, I asked, why are they risking everything to legally steal my physical family estate? Why fabricate a massive $2 million lawsuit and a fake verbal contract for a house they do not actually need to live in? Elena pulled up a highly complex financial algorithm on her secondary screen. "Because they have hit a critical ceiling. The offshore trust is currently redlining. You cannot endlessly funnel tens of thousands of dollars in fake rent payments without eventually triggering a massive federal audit. The Internal Revenue Service algorithms will automatically flag Apex Holdings if they push any more digital cash through a company with zero physical assets. They desperately need a massive brick-and-mortar asset to legitimize the next phase of the operation," Nora explained, pulling up a real estate valuation of my family home. "Your estate is worth roughly $5 million. It is completely paid off, and it sits on prime, highly desirable acreage. If Judge Thorne can successfully grant Jada 50% equity through this fraudulent lawsuit, they can instantly use the property as a massive physical anchor. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The puzzle pieces violently snapped into place. I remembered the heavy commercial dumpsters sitting on my front lawn. I remembered the bewildered contractors drilling into my ceiling on the day I returned from my deployment. The renovations, I whispered, my voice cold and hard. Exactly, Elena confirmed, nodding emphatically. If they control the estate, they can suddenly claim millions of dollars in fake property renovations. They can take out massive, highly leveraged loans against the equity of the house. They can wash entirely unprecedented amounts of dirty cash by claiming they are paying elite contractors to upgrade the property. Your sister-in-law was not just redecorating your living room for her brand launch. She was actively setting up the initial groundwork to launder Thorne's money right inside your childhood home. They did not just want to steal my house. They wanted to turn the only pure thing my parents ever built into a massive criminal laundering hub. And when I unexpectedly arrived home early from my military deployment and forcefully evicted Jada from the premises, I completely derailed their multi-million-dollar expansion plan. That is why Judge Thorne was so aggressively hostile in the courtroom, I said, staring at the photograph of the corrupt magistrate on the wall monitor. That is why he mocked my Navy Cross and illegally froze all of my corporate assets. It was not just arrogance, it was pure, unfiltered panic. I did not just evict his favorite internet influencer. I locked him out of the only physical asset that could save his criminal enterprise from a federal audit. He froze your assets to completely neutralize your ability to fight back, Jax added. He assumed you would panic about the viral video, worry about your corporate stock price, and immediately settle the lawsuit by handing over the house, just to make the public relations nightmare disappear. They severely miscalculated, I stated, turning away from the screens. They looked at my wealth and assumed I was a soft corporate executive who would immediately fold under public pressure. They forgot they are dealing with a man who spent his entire adult life hunting hostile threats in the dark. I looked at my three highly trained analysts. Do we have enough concrete digital evidence to prove the direct financial link between the fake rent payments and Judge Thorne's offshore trust? Nora smiled sharply. We have the exact routing numbers, the encrypted IP logs, and the forged digital signatures. It is completely bulletproof. If a federal prosecutor looks at this file, Judge Thorne will not just be disbarred, he will face a minimum of 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud, extortion, and money laundering. Excellent, I said, checking my heavy steel watch. Package the entire dossier. We are no longer playing defense. We are going to let them think they have successfully trapped me during the mandatory legal deposition tomorrow morning, and then we are going to completely obliterate their entire world. My encrypted phone buzzed violently against the polished surface of the conference table before I could even finalize the data extraction protocol with my team. I glanced down at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed my younger brother's name. Ryan had not attempted to contact me a single time since the day my private security detail escorted him off the estate property. Now, less than 24 hours before the mandatory legal deposition was scheduled to begin, he was suddenly desperate to talk. I held up a hand, signaling my cyber analyst to remain completely quiet. I tapped the screen of my device, immediately activating the integrated corporate recording software. The state of Virginia operates under strict one-party consent laws for recording telephone conversations, as long as one active participant on the call consents to the recording. The audio file is completely admissible as hard evidence in a federal court of law. I pressed the green accept button and put the call on the secure speakerphone. What do you want, Ryan? I asked, my voice completely flat and devoid of any brotherly warmth. Declan, thank God you actually answered. Ryan breathed heavily into the receiver. His voice was incredibly frantic, shaking with a pathetic mixture of intense anxiety and manufactured exhaustion. Listen to me. Things have gotten entirely out of control with this viral video. The media is swarming Jada. You have to stop being so incredibly stubborn and just end this entire nightmare right now. I leaned back in my steel chair. I am not the one who edited a fraudulent video and published it to 10 million strangers, Ryan. Your wife orchestrated this specific public relations disaster. She can deal with the inevitable fallout on her own. You do not understand the sheer gravity of the situation, Declan. Ryan yelled, his panic visibly spiking through the secure connection. You are actively endangering your own family. Jada is pregnant. My team froze their eyes, darting toward the speakerphone in complete shock. Ryan continued, his voice cracking with rehearsed emotion. We found out a few weeks before you unexpectedly kicked us out of the house. The doctor said it is a high-risk pregnancy. The severe emotional trauma of the eviction, combined with this massive legal battle you are forcing us into, is pushing her blood pressure to dangerous levels. She is having severe cramps, Declan. The doctor explicitly warned us that if she does not find a permanent, stable, and completely stress-free living environment, immediately she is going to lose the baby. He paused, letting the heavy emotional manipulation hang in the air. He was actively using a hypothetical unborn child as a psychological weapon to break my defenses. Declan, you have so much money. Ryan begged, his tone shifting into a whiny, desperate plea. You do not even sleep in that house for half of the year. Please just sign the estate deed over to Jada. Let us have the house. Drop your aggressive legal defense, pay the settlement she is asking for, and just walk away. If you do this, I promise Jada will immediately delete the viral video and publicly clear your name. If you do not sign this house over, you will have the blood of your own nephew on your hands forever. The silence stretched across the secure line. I looked at Nora. She immediately pulled up a highly encrypted digital folder on her secondary monitor. When Jada filed her initial civil lawsuit claiming severe physical and emotional distress, my corporate legal team immediately filed a standard subpoena for her comprehensive medical records to verify her alleged injuries. Nora opened the hospital file on the glass screen and highlighted the results of a comprehensive blood panel and physical examination Jada underwent exactly 4 days ago. Her human chorionic gonadotropin levels were practically zero. There was absolutely no fetal heartbeat. There was no gestational sac. Jada Brooks was entirely undeniably not pregnant. My own brother was knowingly participating in a massive criminal extortion plot, using a fabricated pregnancy to emotionally terrorize me into handing over a $5 million asset to a money laundering syndicate. Any residual shred of family loyalty I still harbored for Ryan instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold surgical precision. I stared at the medical report, keeping my breathing perfectly steady. Let me make sure I clearly understand the terms of this arrangement, Ryan. I said, speaking slowly and deliberately to ensure the recording captured every single syllable with absolute clarity. If I legally transfer the complete deed of the primary family estate into Jada's name today, and I pay her the requested $2 million settlement, she will officially withdraw her current civil lawsuit. Yes, exactly, Ryan answered quickly, sounding immensely relieved that his emotional terrorism was seemingly working. And she will immediately retract her public statements claiming I violently assaulted her. I continued pressing. Yes, Declan, Ryan promised eagerly. She will post a new video saying it was all a massive misunderstanding. We just need the physical house and the financial stability for the baby. We desperately need the cash right now to secure our future. Just sign the transfer papers, and this entire problem completely disappears forever. You are absolutely certain Jada agrees to this specific exchange? I asked one final time, tightening the invisible noose around his neck. I am sitting right next to her, Ryan confirmed. We are completely aligned on this. Just give us the property, Declan. Thank you for clarifying your position, Ryan, I replied, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the lethal weight of absolute finality. I will handle this situation exactly the way it deserves to be handled. Do not ever call this number again. Wait, Declan, are you going to sign the transfer? I abruptly severed the connection, cutting off his pathetic voice. I looked at the digital audio file securely saved on my terminal. Ryan thought he was being a fiercely loyal husband defending his traumatized pregnant wife. In reality, he had just confessed to felony extortion and blackmail on a recorded line, tying himself directly to a massive federal conspiracy. I stood up from the heavy steel table and adjusted the cuffs of my suit. Send that audio file directly to the federal prosecutor along with the financial dossier. I instructed my team. My brother made his choice today. Tomorrow morning at the official legal deposition, we are going to let them all drown in their own lies. The morning sun glared harshly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Gregory's downtown legal offices, casting long, sharp shadows across the premium conference room. The space was a masterclass in psychological intimidation, designed entirely with cold, sharp angles, heavy mahogany furniture, and absolutely zero personal touches. I sat quietly in the far corner of the expansive room, deliberately choosing a high-backed leather chair positioned slightly out of the direct line of sight from the primary witness seat. I wore a dark, meticulously tailored charcoal suit projecting nothing but icy detachment. A professional court reporter sat at the edge of the massive table, her fingers resting lightly on the keys of her mechanical steno machine, entirely ready to capture every single lie that was about to be spoken under federal oath. I did not check my phone. I did not review any legal notes. I simply waited. The deposition was formally scheduled to begin at exactly 9 in the morning. Jada strutted through the heavy glass doors at 10:15. She did not offer a single word of apology for her blatant tardiness. Instead, she entered the sterile legal environment as if she were stepping onto a private fashion runway in Milan. She wore an immaculate, blindingly white designer suit that probably cost more than my brother's entire annual salary. A massive $20,000 Himalayan crocodile. Hermes Birkin bag was slung carelessly over her forearm, a glaring physical manifestation of the stolen money she had siphoned from vulnerable women online. Thick gold Cartier love bracelets clanked loudly against her wrist as she aggressively tossed her oversized designer sunglasses onto the polished mahogany table. She looked completely untouchable, radiating an aura of absolute arrogant victory. She genuinely believed the viral video had entirely destroyed my corporate leverage, and she was just here to formally collect her multi-million-dollar settlement. Ryan trailed closely behind her, looking entirely miserable and entirely complicit. He carried two thick accordion folders of heavily fabricated legal documents, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. His eyes were heavily bloodshot, and a thick layer of nervous sweat glistened constantly on his forehead. He practically flinched when he saw me sitting silently in the corner, but I refused to make any eye contact with him whatsoever. My brother was officially a ghost to me. He pulled out a heavy leather chair for Jada, but she completely ignored his polite gesture, choosing the dominant seat directly across from Gregory instead. She wanted to be in the absolute center of the action. She wanted the spotlight. Jada's attorney, the flashy local lawyer known for chasing highly publicized corporate settlements, dropped his heavy leather briefcase onto the table with a loud, aggressive thud. He shot Gregory a sickeningly smug, superior smile. "Let us try to make this incredibly quick today, counselor," he announced loudly, conspicuously checking his heavy gold watch. "My client has suffered immense psychological trauma over the past month, and sitting in a room with her abuser is causing her severe medically documented emotional distress. We are only here today as a professional legal courtesy before we formally file for immediate summary judgment." Gregory did not take the obvious bait. He did not vigorously defend my character. Nor did he mention the highly defamatory viral video that was currently threatening my corporate empire. He simply adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, clicked his silver pen with a sharp snap, and looked directly at the court reporter. "Please let the official record reflect that the deposition of Jada Brooks is commencing at 10:20 in the morning." He looked over at Jada, who was currently checking her reflection in the dark screen of her smartphone, completely ignoring the severity of the legal proceeding. "State your full legal name for the record, Mrs. Brooks." Jada sighed heavily, rolling her eyes as if the basic legal protocol was a massive inconvenience to her incredibly busy entrepreneurial schedule. She stated her name, her posture slouched in an intentional display of utter disrespect toward my attorney. Gregory nodded slowly. He opened a remarkably thin manila folder, intentionally making his legal preparation look entirely underwhelming and remarkably weak. He began the official questioning with a series of incredibly mundane, mind-numbingly boring inquiries. He asked about her high school educational background. He asked her to confirm her current residential address, allowing her to smugly and aggressively state that she was currently displaced due to a hostile and unlawful eviction. He spent 20 excruciating minutes asking her to detail her daily morning routine as a lifestyle influencer. Jada's initial highly defensive posture completely dissolved. She had walked into the conference room fully expecting a vicious, highly aggressive interrogation about her fabricated pregnancy, the brutal viral video, or the massive $2 million extortion attempt. She had clearly spent hours rehearsing dramatic, tearful, highly emotional responses with her attorney. Instead, Gregory was asking her about the specific digital filters she used on her photography and the brand names of her expensive studio recording equipment. She grew visibly bored. Her sharp, calculated defensive edge softened into lazy, absolute arrogance. She began to lean back in her premium leather chair, answering Gregory's soft-pitched questions with prolonged, highly boastful explanations of her incredible business acumen and her massive social media reach. I remained completely motionless in the corner, letting my heavy silence entirely blanket the room. I watched Jada fall perfectly into the psychological trap we had meticulously designed. In advanced threat intelligence, you never attack a hostile target when their digital shields are fully raised and they are actively expecting a direct assault. You bore them into absolute submission. You make them feel incredibly intelligent and totally secure in their false narrative. You let their own massive narcissism do the heavy lifting for you. Jada was so incredibly busy bragging about her premium empowerment brand and her supposedly massive legitimate income that she did not notice Gregory slowly and carefully steering the conversation toward her official financial structures. "Now, Mrs. Brooks," Gregory said softly, peering over the top of his glasses and steepling his fingers on the table. "You mentioned your lifestyle brand is officially registered as a limited liability company. Could you please confirm the exact date of that corporate registration and the primary banking institution you utilize for your daily business transactions?" Jada confidently rattled off the specific date and the name of her national bank, completely unaware that the invisible steel walls of the federal perjury trap were slowly closing in around her. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, wiping his profusely sweating palms on his trousers, perhaps finally sensing the incredibly subtle shift in the air. But Jada just smiled brightly at the court reporter. She was entirely ready to talk extensively about her massive wealth, and that was exactly what we were waiting for. "Thank you for that explicit clarification regarding your primary banking institution, Mrs. Brooks," Gregory said softly. He slowly uncapped his silver fountain pen and carefully wrote on a single solitary legal pad. The scratching sound of the metal nib against the thick paper seemed incredibly loud in the heavy silence of the conference room. "Now, if you do not mind, let us transition slightly to discuss the primary revenue streams of this highly successful lifestyle brand you have built." Jada eagerly adjusted her massive $20,000 Hermes bag on the polished table, subtly pushing it further into Gregory's direct line of sight. She straightened her posture, lifting her chin in a display of supreme arrogance. She was entirely in her element now. This was the exact narrative she had spent years meticulously crafting for her massive online audience. "My income is generated through exclusive high-ticket empowerment coaching," Jada stated proudly, her voice echoing sharply against the cold glass walls. "I work directly with ambitious, highly motivated women across the country, helping them unlock their absolute highest financial and emotional potential. I charge a premium monthly rate because I deliver premium life-changing results. My clients rely on my specific expertise to completely elevate their entire existence." Gregory nodded slowly, his face a perfect mask of polite professional admiration. He acted thoroughly impressed by her rehearsed corporate speech. "Fascinating," he murmured. "So, to be completely clear for the official court record today, all of the massive wealth you prominently display on your various social media channels, the designer wardrobes, the luxury vehicles, and this incredibly impressive handbag sitting on the table is entirely funded by your direct one-on-one coaching services." Jada scoffed loudly, shooting a deeply condescending look at her own flashy attorney, who simply smirked in return. Of course it is. Jada snapped, acting highly offended by the basic inquiry. I am a fiercely independent self-made woman. I built my entire digital empire from the absolute ground up through sheer hustle, intense focus, and relentless determination. I do not rely on anyone else for my success. Every single dollar sitting in my corporate banking account is the direct result of my hard-earned lifestyle coaching revenue. Ryan shifted violently in his heavy leather chair. His bloodshot eyes darted frantically toward me in the dark corner of the room, silently begging for some kind of intervention. He knew exactly what she was doing, because he had seen the financial ledgers himself. He knew she was digging a massive, inescapable grave right in front of a licensed federal court reporter. He was actively watching his own wife commit multiple federal offenses in real time. And he was entirely powerless to stop her because his own freedom was completely tied to her fragile narrative. But I remained an absolute statue, my face locked into a mask of cold, unyielding detachment. I was not going to stop her. I was going to let her speak until she had absolutely no air left in her lungs. I deeply respect that level of entrepreneurial dedication, Mrs. Brooks. Gregory continued, his voice remaining perfectly smooth and remarkably unthreatening. Since you are so heavily involved in the financial empowerment of your vulnerable clients, do you also happen to run, manage, or privately facilitate any secondary investment groups? Perhaps a private financial syndicate where your loyal followers pool their money together for guaranteed high-yield returns. Jada did not even hesitate for a single second. The massive catastrophic lie slipped past her glossed lips with terrifying practiced ease. Absolutely not, she declared firmly. I am a specialized lifestyle coach, not a registered Wall Street stockbroker. I strictly provide emotional and structural life guidance. I have never once asked a single client to invest in any secondary financial portfolios, offshore accounts, or exclusive wealth generation funds. My business model is entirely transparent and deeply rooted in personal mentorship. The court reporter's mechanical keys clacked aggressively, permanently, etching her blatant perjury into the federal legal record. Jada was so utterly consumed by her own fabricated brilliance that she could completely not see the invisible steel wires tightening securely around her throat. She had just emphatically denied the exact mechanism of her massive illegal Ponzi scheme under the binding constraints of a federal oath. Every single syllable she just uttered was a highly documented felony. Gregory let the heavy silence hang in the room for a prolonged moment, deliberately allowing the absolute gravity of her spectacular lie to settle deeply into the legal transcript. He casually turned a single page in his remarkably thin manila folder. Excellent, Gregory finally said, offering her a completely hollow, polite smile. That makes things incredibly simple moving forward. Now, Mrs. Brooks, in the regular course of managing your highly successful, strictly coaching-based business enterprise, you obviously incur significant monthly operating expenses. Premium commercial rent, for example. Jada crossed her arms defensively across her chest, the heavy gold Cartier bracelets clanking loudly against each other in the quiet room. Yes, she answered, her tone dripping with intense boredom. Premium commercial real estate is incredibly expensive. Before your unhinged client violently and illegally evicted me from my primary sanctuary, I was paying a massive premium for a highly secure virtual office suite to maintain my corporate privacy and handle my high-volume business mail. It is a standard operating expense for an entrepreneur of my specific caliber. Gregory leaned forward very slightly, resting his forearms on the mahogany table. He looked directly into her heavily mascaraed eyes, his voice dropping into a slightly lower, far more serious register. Are you currently familiar with, or have you ever conducted any financial business whatsoever with a commercial property management firm, legally registered, under the name Apex Holdings? Jada let out a sharp, highly arrogant laugh. She looked over at her attorney, rolling her eyes in a heavily exaggerated display of total disbelief. No, Jada answered, her voice ringing with absolute, unwavering certainty. I have absolutely no idea what Apex Holdings is. I assume my dedicated accounting team handles the specific monthly checks for my virtual office, but I have never personally heard that specific name in my entire life. Is this really what we are wasting our valuable time on today? I am a highly traumatized victim of a brutal physical assault, and you are asking me incredibly boring questions about random property management firms. Every single word she spoke was a highly calculated lie. She was the sole authorized signatory on the primary corporate bank account that explicitly wired $40,000 to Apex Holdings on the first day of every single month. She personally executed the massive digital transfers using her own encrypted biometric signature to launder the stolen money directly into Judge Thorne's offshore trust. She knew exactly what Apex Holdings was because it was the beating heart of her entire criminal empire. Gregory did not react to her aggressive outburst. He did not point out her glaring contradictions. He simply turned to the court reporter. Please ensure Mrs. Brooks's complete denial regarding Apex Holdings is accurately reflected in the official transcript, he instructed calmly. I sat in the dark corner of the room, feeling a cold, dark satisfaction wash entirely over me. The trap was now permanently locked. Jada had confidently marched into a federal legal proceeding and committed aggressive, undeniable perjury on the permanent record. She thought she was masterfully controlling the entire narrative, completely oblivious to the massive arsenal of forensic digital evidence currently sitting in my secure briefcase. She had just handed me the absolute legal authority to destroy her entire existence. Gregory did not push the issue of Apex Holdings any further. He simply let her massive denial hang suspended in the sterile air of the conference room, perfectly preserved by the rhythmic clacking of the court reporter's steno machine. He closed his thin manila folder and neatly aligned it with the edge of the mahogany table. He looked up at Jada with an expression of mild manufactured defeat. Is there anything else you would like to add to the official record today regarding your financial damages, Mrs. Brooks? Gregory asked softly, his tone completely submissive. Jada sensed the distinct shift in power. In her mind, she had successfully backed my high-priced corporate attorney into a corner. She viewed his polite deference as an absolute surrender. She leaned forward, resting her elbows aggressively on the table, her heavy Cartier jewelry catching the harsh morning sunlight. She was no longer just answering legal questions. She was preparing to deliver a self-righteous monologue. I want the record to clearly state exactly why we are all sitting in this miserable room today, Jada announced, her voice rising in volume and theatrical intensity. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at me in the dark corner. We are here because that man is a deeply traumatized, greedy loser who absolutely cannot handle the success of a powerful, independent woman. I inherited every single thing he owns. He never had to struggle or build a legitimate brand from scratch like I did. He just coasted on his family name and his corporate connections. Her flashy attorney nodded encouragingly, clearly thrilled that his client was passionately reinforcing the narrative they intended to sell to the media. Ryan, however, looked completely physically ill. He slumped lower in his leather chair, squeezing his eyes shut as if bracing for a physical impact. Jada was completely unbothered by her husband's intense distress. She fed on the silent energy of the room, entirely intoxicated by her own perceived brilliance. Look at him hiding in the shadows, she sneered, her upper lip curling in profound disgust. He parades around pretending to be some elite corporate genius, but underneath it all, he is incredibly weak. He went overseas, played soldier, and came back entirely broken. Now he uses his fake military trauma as an excuse to violently terrorize innocent people. He attacked me because he is incredibly jealous of my massive online influence and my completely self-made wealth. He has millions of dollars sitting in corporate accounts. Yet he is so pathologically greedy that he refuses to share a single piece of his massive empty family estate with his own blood relatives who actually need the space. The court reporter's fingers flew across the mechanical keys, frantically capturing every single toxic, defamatory word. He does not deserve his wealth, Jada continued, her voice vibrating with pure, unadulterated entitlement. He does not deserve that massive house, and he certainly does not deserve to run a global security firm when he is clearly suffering from severe psychological instability. That viral video I posted is just the beginning. The entire world is finally seeing exactly what kind of monster Declan truly is. I am not just going to take 50% of the estate equity. I am going to take the $2 million in damages, and I am going to make sure his corporate board officially removes him from his own company. By the time I am finished holding him accountable, he will be absolutely nothing. She sat back heavily in her premium leather chair, crossing her arms in a posture of total untouchable triumph. She looked directly into my eyes for the first time since the deposition began, expecting to see intense rage or devastating panic. She expected to see a broken man desperately trying to salvage his crumbling empire. I gave her absolutely nothing. I sat perfectly still, my breathing slow and entirely measured. The cold, clinical detachment I learned in the military was fully engaged. I did not blink. I did not shift my weight. I just watched her bask in the artificial glow of her temporary fabricated victory. She was a masterclass in modern corporate arrogance, completely blinded by her own massive ego and completely unaware of the lethal digital snare wrapping tightly around her throat. She thought my silence was an admission of total defeat. She genuinely believed she was the smartest person in the room, seamlessly outmaneuvering my entire defense strategy with her flashy designer bags and her rehearsed internet empowerment speeches. What Jada did not know, and what her aggressively confident attorney completely failed to realize, was that this specific deposition was never actually about a civil real estate dispute. This room was not a legal defense mechanism, it was a federal execution chamber. Before I stepped into this glass conference room at 8:00 this morning, I initiated a highly encrypted direct communication channel with Special Agent Marcus Vance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Elite Financial Crimes Division. I did not just send him the massive digital dossier my cyber team compiled on Jada's illegal Ponzi scheme and Judge Thorne's offshore money laundering trust. I gave the federal government total unrestricted access to the live feed of this exact legal proceeding. Directly underneath the heavy mahogany table securely attached to the bottom of Gregory's open leather briefcase, a highly advanced miniaturized corporate recording device was actively transmitting every single word spoken in this room directly to a secure federal server in Washington. Special Agent Vance and a dedicated team of federal prosecutors were currently sitting in a heavily fortified digital operations center, listening to the live audio and reading the real-time transcription of Jada's entire arrogant monologue. They heard her proudly claim complete ownership of her massive fraudulent coaching revenue. They heard her aggressively and explicitly deny any knowledge of Apex Holdings officially committing felony perjury on a live federal wire. And now they were listening to her actively attempt to extort a massive financial settlement out of me, using a highly manipulated defamatory social media video as extreme leverage. Jada thought she was ruthlessly destroying my public reputation. In reality, she was meticulously building her own federal indictment brick by heavy brick, completely unprompted. "Are we completely finished here, counselor?" Jada's lawyer asked loudly, checking his gold watch again. "Because my client has an incredibly busy schedule, and quite frankly, we have all the recorded testimony we need to completely destroy your client in front of a civil jury. I suggest you heavily advise Declan to sign the settlement papers before the end of the business day. The settlement offer permanently expires at exactly 500. Gregory slowly capped his silver fountain pen and placed it neatly into his suit pocket. He looked at Jada, who was currently reapplying her expensive lip gloss, looking entirely victorious and completely bored. "Yes," Gregory finally said, his voice entirely devoid of its previous submissive tone. It was now sharp cold and incredibly precise. "I believe Mrs. Brooks has said absolutely everything she needs to say on the official record today. We are completely finished with this specific phase of the inquiry." Jada snapped her designer compact shut and stood up aggressively, grabbing her massive crocodile bag. She shot me one final, deeply condescending glare before turning her back and marching proudly toward the heavy glass doors. Ryan scrambled frantically to collect the heavy accordion folders, practically running to keep up with her commanding stride. I remained entirely seated in the dark corner of the room, watching them leave. The massive heavy steel doors of the federal trap had officially slammed shut, locking them firmly inside. Now it was entirely time to flood the room. Jada stopped abruptly just before she pushed through the heavy glass doors of the conference room. She turned back to face me, a sickeningly triumphant smirk stretching across her heavily contoured face. She adjusted the $20,000 Hermes bag on her forearm, relishing the absolute power she believed she held in this exact moment. "Start packing your bags, Declan," Jada sneered, her voice dripping with venomous arrogance. She looked me up and down with intense theatrical pity. "I want all of your personal items completely cleared out of the primary master suite by Friday evening. The contractors are coming in early Saturday morning to completely gut the entire floor. If you leave a single piece of your depressing military memorabilia behind, I will personally throw it directly into the commercial dumpster on the front lawn." I did not give her the satisfaction of a vocal response. I did not glare at her, nor did I display a single ounce of the burning rage that had fueled my entire intelligence operation over the past month. I simply stood up from the heavy leather chair, calmly buttoned the front of my tailored charcoal suit, and picked up my secure titanium briefcase. I walked silently across the expansive room, my footsteps echoing sharply against the polished hardwood floor. I did not even break my stride or offer a single glance as I passed her. I walked straight through the heavy glass doors, leaving Jada and my terrified brother standing in the absolute silence of their own impending destruction. My armored black SUV was already waiting at the private curb outside the downtown legal building. I climbed into the spacious back seat and immediately instructed my private driver to head straight to the federal courthouse. The drive was completely silent, allowing me to mentally prepare for the final devastating tactical strike. 10 minutes later, I bypassed the crowded public security checkpoints and took a secure badge access elevator directly to a highly restricted windowless conference room on the 8th floor. Special Agent Marcus Vance was already waiting for me, standing purposefully alongside a severe-looking lead federal prosecutor and two senior executive representatives from the State Judicial Conduct Commission. The atmosphere in the secure room was incredibly tense, charged with the electric thrill of a massive impending takedown. They had all been actively listening to the live audio feed of the deposition. They heard Jada arrogantly confirm her massive financial fraud and proudly perjure herself on a live federal wire. I placed my titanium briefcase on the heavy metal table and seamlessly bypassed the biometric lock. I pulled out a single, highly encrypted solid-state drive containing the complete unredacted financial dossier my cyber team had meticulously compiled. It held every single forged digital signature, every offshore routing number, and the undeniable mathematical proof of the illegal money laundering pipeline directly connecting Jada Brooks to Judge Harrison Thorne. "We have the official audio confession secured," the federal prosecutor stated smoothly, staring hungrily at the small black drive resting in my hand. "Do we have the concrete financial proof?" I slid the heavy digital drive directly across the cold metal table. "You have the absolute golden key," I replied firmly, locking eyes with the federal agents. "The entire offshore trust is completely exposed. Checkmate." 72 hours later, the heavy oak doors of the county courthouse swung open, revealing a completely packed gallery. The air inside the courtroom was thick with intense anticipation and the suffocating weight of impending judgment. The local media had swarmed the historic building, desperate to capture the highly publicized destruction of the allegedly unhinged military veteran they had been relentlessly vilifying on the evening news. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my secure titanium briefcase firmly gripped in my right hand, and took my seat at the defense table next to Gregory. The trap was heavily primed. Judge Harrison Thorne sat high upon his elevated mahogany bench, looking down at the crowded room with an expression of intense, thinly veiled impatience. He rapidly shuffled a thick stack of official legal documents, his heavy black judicial robes completely concealing the massive federal crimes he was actively facilitating. I was incredibly eager to forcefully drop his wooden gavel, officially award Jada the massive $2 million settlement, and legally transfer the complete deed of my physical family estate directly into her name. He desperately wanted his new physical money laundering hub fully operational before the end of the business day. Every single second of delay was actively cutting into his illegal profits. Directly across the aisle at the plaintiff's table, Jada was putting on an absolute masterclass in manufactured victimhood for the assembled press. She wore a remarkably modest, highly conservative black dress today, completely abandoning the flashy designer brands she arrogantly paraded during the civil deposition. She dabbed her eyes delicately with a pristine white tissue whenever a press camera flashed in her general direction. But the precise moment the media focused their collective attention back on the judge, she completely dropped the traumatized act. She turned her head slightly, locking eyes with me across the cold wooden tables, and flashed a sickeningly victorious, incredibly arrogant smirk. She genuinely believed she had successfully manipulated the entire American legal system to completely steal my wealth. She thought she had definitively won. Ryan sat rigidly in the heavy wooden chair right next to her, looking absolutely terrified. He kept his head bowed entirely, staring intently at his own fiercely trembling hands resting on his lap. He absolutely refused to make any direct eye contact with me whatsoever. He knew exactly what he had done on that recorded phone call. He knew he had actively participated in a massive criminal extortion plot, and the crushing, inescapable guilt of his massive betrayal was currently suffocating him in real time. He looked exactly like a man walking directly toward a firing squad. Judge Thorne cleared his throat loudly, the sharp, aggressive sound echoing violently through the expansive room and demanding absolute silence from the heavily crowded gallery. He glared down at Gregory and me with a look of supreme, unchallengeable judicial authority. "Let us get straight to the point this morning, Counselor," Thorne barked aggressively, completely bypassing any standard legal pleasantries. "I have thoroughly reviewed the complete transcripts from the civil deposition. Your client has absolutely no viable defense against these severe allegations of unprovoked physical assault and extreme emotional distress. I am fully prepared to officially bypass a lengthy trial rule immediately in favor of the plaintiff and formally initiate the immediate legal transfer of the contested estate property right now." Judge Thorne raised his heavy wooden gavel, his knuckles turning stark white as he prepared to forcefully strike the sounding block and permanently seal the fraudulent transfer of my family estate. The packed gallery of reporters leaned forward collectively, their cameras raised and ready to capture the exact moment of my ultimate downfall. Jada's victorious smirk widened into a full display of gleaming white teeth, her eyes locked onto mine in a silent declaration of total victory. She thought she had completely conquered the wealthy, traumatized veteran. Before the wooden gavel could make contact, Gregory calmly pushed his heavy leather chair back. The harsh scrape of the wooden legs against the floor cut through the tense silence of the room like a physical blow. He stood up slowly, meticulously buttoning his suit jacket with an air of absolute unyielding defiance. "Your Honor, the defense formally declines the opportunity to settle this entirely fabricated civil matter," Gregory announced, his voice projecting loudly and clearly to the very back row of the crowded courtroom. "Furthermore, we are immediately introducing new highly material evidence directly into the official public record. I am handing the court bailiff defense Exhibit A, which contains irrefutable digital proof of the plaintiff actively committing multiple counts of federal perjury during her sworn deposition yesterday afternoon, alongside comprehensive unredacted federal financial records detailing her massive illegal enterprise." A collective electrified gasp rippled violently through the packed gallery. The press reporters instantly began frantically typing on their smartphones, sensing a massive, unprecedented shift in the narrative. At the plaintiff table, Jada's arrogant smile instantly vanished completely, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. The modern, untouchable empowerment influencer suddenly looked like a terrified child caught in a massive lie. She looked frantically at her flashy attorney, who suddenly appeared incredibly small, wildly flipping through his own empty legal pads, entirely out of his depth. Judge Thorne froze, the wooden gavel hovering uselessly in the air. His entire demeanor violently shifted from impatient arrogance to absolute terrified shock. "What exactly are you attempting to pull in my courtroom, Counselor?" Thorne demanded, his voice suddenly lacking its previous booming authority, cracking slightly under the intense pressure. Gregory simply gestured toward the bailiff, who approached the elevated bench and handed the judge a thick, heavily bound physical copy of the financial dossier my cyber intelligence team had meticulously compiled. As Judge Thorne aggressively snatched the folder and flipped open the heavy cover, all the blood completely drained from his face. His skin turned an ashen, sickly gray. I watched his panicked eyes dart frantically across the top page. He was staring directly at the explicit banking routing numbers for Apex Holdings and the exact digital signatures tying the stolen money directly to his own protected offshore trust. The absolute golden key to his destruction was now sitting entirely exposed in his own hands, officially entered into his own public court record. "This is completely inadmissible." Thorne stammered, his hands shaking so violently that the thick paper rattled against the mahogany bench. He looked up, sheer panic radiating from his widened eyes, desperately searching for an escape route that no longer existed. "I am immediately striking this entirely fabricated document from the official court record. Bailiff, confiscate all remaining copies immediately. This proceeding is officially adjourned." But it was entirely too late. The irreversible damage was done, and the federal hammer was already falling. The wooden gavel struck the sounding block with a frantic, desperate rhythm, echoing like rapid gunfire across the stunned courtroom. "Court is adjourned," Judge Thorne screamed into his heavy desktop microphone, his voice completely stripping away any remaining facade of dignified judicial composure. He practically threw the thick financial dossier back at the court bailiff, acting as if the physical paper were violently burning his hands. "I said this proceeding is entirely adjourned. The gallery must clear the room immediately. Security, remove the defense counsel for contempt of court." He was a cornered animal frantically clawing at the walls of his collapsing empire. The local sheriff's deputies stationed around the perimeter of the room hesitated, completely unsure of how to proceed. They looked from the wildly panicking judge down to the perfectly calm defense table. Gregory simply stood his ground, folding his hands neatly in front of his suit jacket. I remained perfectly seated, my eyes locked on the elevated bench, watching the corrupt magistrate entirely unravel in real time. From the third row of the packed public gallery, three figures abruptly stood up in perfect, terrifying unison. They had been sitting there quietly for the entire morning, dressed in remarkably plain, inconspicuous business suits, blending seamlessly into the massive crowd of local journalists and curious spectators. They did not shout, they did not rush. They moved with the cold, undeniable authority of apex predators who had finally cornered their designated prey. Special Agent Marcus Vance stepped directly into the center aisle, followed closely by his federal partner and a senior executive from the State Judicial Ethics Committee. Vance reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a heavy leather credential case, flipping it open to prominently display his golden federal badge. The chaotic murmuring of the massive press gallery instantly died down into a suffocating, electrified silence. Even the local deputies instinctively took a half step back. "The federal government politely objects to your immediate adjournment, Your Honor," Agent Vance announced. His voice was not raised, but it carried a lethal, booming clarity that easily commanded the entire massive room. Judge Thorne stared down at the three federal officials approaching his bench, his jaw actually dropping. A thick bead of nervous sweat visibly rolled down his temple, severely staining the stiff white collar of his dress shirt. "You have absolutely no jurisdiction in this county courthouse," Thorne stammered, gripping the edges of his heavy wooden desk so tightly his knuckles turned a sickly shade of white. "I am a highly protected sitting magistrate of this state. I possess absolute judicial immunity from outside interference. I demand you vacate my courtroom this exact instant before I hold you all in federal contempt." Agent Vance stopped exactly at the wooden swinging gate that separated the gallery from the legal tables. He did not look intimidated. He looked immensely bored by the pathetic display of false authority. "Judicial immunity officially covers the legal decisions you make from that elevated bench," Agent Vance corrected smoothly, unlatching the wooden gate and stepping directly into the restricted well of the court. "It explicitly does not cover massive federal wire fraud, aggravated extortion, or the systematic laundering of stolen money through offshore shell corporations." You are not currently acting as a judge, Mr. Thorne. You are actively operating as the primary handler of a highly lucrative criminal financial syndicate. And your absolute immunity expired the precise second you attempted to use a fabricated civil lawsuit to illegally steal a $5 million private estate to legitimize your dirty cash. The courtroom erupted into total chaos. The press reporters in the gallery completely lost their minds, rapidly snapping hundreds of photographs of the federal agents aggressively dismantling a sitting judge. The blinding flashes of the cameras illuminated Thorne's face, capturing his absolute pathetic terror for the entire world to witness. Jada sprang up from the plaintiff table, her heavy black dress practically tangling around her legs in her frantic haste. She looked wildly toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the room, her eyes darting back and forth like a trapped rat, desperately searching for a tiny crack in the baseboards. She grabbed her flashy attorney by the sleeve of his expensive suit, her manicured nails digging fiercely into the fabric. "Do something!" Jada hissed, her voice vibrating with pure panic. "You told me we had a guaranteed bulletproof victory today. You told me this judge was going to hand me the complete property deed. Stop them right now. Fix this." Her high-priced aggressive attorney violently yanked his arm out of her frantic grip. He looked at the two federal agents, then looked directly at the massive, heavily bound financial dossier currently sitting on the bailiff's desk. The color had completely drained from his own face. He was an incredibly arrogant man, but he was not an idiot. He instantly recognized the terrifying weight of a federal money laundering investigation. "I am officially withdrawing as your legal counsel, effective immediately," her lawyer stated rapidly, shoving his blank legal pads back into his heavy leather briefcase. "I have absolutely nothing to do with any offshore trusts or federal wire fraud. You lied to me about the absolute nature of your financial structures. You are entirely on your own, Jada." He did not even look back at her as he swiftly abandoned the plaintiff table, practically running down the center aisle to escape the blast radius of her imploding life. Jada was left standing completely alone, her mouth hanging open in absolute shock. The modern, fiercely independent empowerment influencer who had aggressively commanded massive online audiences just 24 hours ago was suddenly entirely stripped of her artificial power. She was completely exposed, standing naked in the harsh, unforgiving light of federal justice. At the bench, Judge Thorne violently collapsed backward into his heavy leather chair. The fight completely drained out of his physical body. He looked like a massive, deflated balloon. His mouth moved silently, unable to form a single coherent word of defense against the mountain of digital evidence stacked explicitly against him. The representative from the Judicial Ethics Committee stepped forward, looking down at the broken man with profound, intense disgust. "Harrison Thorne, you are hereby immediately suspended from all official judicial duties, pending a comprehensive ethical and criminal review," the representative stated coldly. Agent Vance pulled a thick stack of folded federal warrants from his interior suit pocket and tossed them casually onto the mahogany bench. "You have the right to remain completely silent," Vance announced, pulling a heavy pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click of the restraints echoed sharply through the room. "I highly suggest you finally start using that right." Agent Vance forcefully turned the disgraced judge around right where he stood. Thorne's heavy black judicial robes twisted awkwardly around his knees as his arms were wrenched aggressively behind his back. The cold steel of the federal handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists, creating a brutal metallic finality that echoed sharply above the deafening roar of the packed press gallery. The relentless flashing camera bulbs created a blinding strobe effect across the historic courtroom, brilliantly illuminating the absolute destruction of a deeply corrupt legal empire. Thorne was no longer a powerful, untouchable magistrate presiding over his local county fiefdom. He was a broken, heavily sweating criminal stripped entirely of his artificial, unearned authority. The state ethics representative formally ordered him to step down from the elevated mahogany platform immediately. Thorne stumbled clumsily on the polished wooden steps, his expensive leather shoes slipping underneath his own dead weight. The second federal agent had to practically drag him by the thick collar of his robes just to keep him upright. The profound visual impact of a sitting judge, being physically hauled out of his own courtroom, sent massive electrified shockwaves through the public seating area. The local journalists were practically shouting their real-time commentary into their mobile recording devices, fully recognizing they were witnessing the greatest judicial scandal in the history of the state. The continuous escalating conflict that Thorne and Jada had actively engineered to destroy me had completely backfired, trapping them entirely in a federal snare. With the judge successfully secured and completely neutralized by the perimeter team, Agent Vance slowly turned his undivided attention back to the plaintiff table. He calmly adjusted his suit jacket, reaching into his interior pocket to pull out a second set of heavily stamped warrants. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open once again, and four additional plain-clothed federal agents poured directly into the center aisle, firmly establishing an inescapable physical perimeter around the heavy wooden tables. Jada watched the agents advance with wide, entirely unblinking eyes. The devastating, undeniable reality of her catastrophic situation finally breached the thick, impenetrable walls of her massive narcissism. She was completely trapped. Agent Vance stopped directly in front of her, his expression entirely devoid of any professional sympathy. "Jada Brooks," Agent Vance stated, his voice projecting with lethal clarity through the chaotic noise of the massive room. "I hold a federal warrant for your immediate arrest. You are officially being charged with 47 counts of felony wire fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and the unlawful operation of a massive multi-million-dollar financial Ponzi scheme, heavily targeting vulnerable female citizens across the United States. You utilized a highly fabricated narrative of modern empowerment to systematically drain the legitimate life savings of thousands of trusting followers, and you attempted to launder those stolen funds through an illegal offshore trust." The absolute finality of the massive federal charges hit Jada like a high-speed freight train. Her carefully constructed, highly profitable facade as an empowered modern female entrepreneur completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. The curated digital world she tightly controlled had entirely evaporated. She let out a piercing, wildly hysterical scream that genuinely rattled the thick glass windows of the historic judicial building. It was not a calculated, theatrical cry for public sympathy. It was the raw, primal sound of total, unadulterated panic. "No!" Jada shrieked, backing away from the wooden table so violently her heavy chair crashed backward onto the hard floor. "You absolutely cannot do this to me. I am a highly influential public figure. This is a massive, coordinated misunderstanding. You are ruining my entire brand." The federal agents stepped much closer, their posture shifting instantly into a highly tactical, unyielding formation. Jada completely lost her mind. She grabbed the massive $20,000 Himalayan crocodile Hermes bag from the table and hurled it directly at Agent Vance with all of her desperate physical strength. The heavy designer bag struck his shoulder and violently exploded open upon hitting the ground, scattering expensive imported cosmetics, glowing smartphones, and thick bundles of stolen cash completely across the dirty courtroom floor. "Fix this." Jada screamed, her face twisting into a horrifying, deeply ugly mask of pure toxic rage. She spun around and aggressively grabbed Ryan by the lapels of his wrinkled suit. "Do something, Ryan. You are my husband, defend me. Tell them this entire thing is a massive lie. Stop them right now." Ryan stood completely frozen in the chaotic center of the room. The blinding camera flashes captured every single ounce of his absolute pathetic terror. He looked at the federal agents closing in on his screaming wife. He looked at the massive digital dossier of undeniable forensic evidence sitting heavily on the bailiff's desk. And finally, he looked directly across the aisle at me. He explicitly remembered the specific, highly incriminating audio recording of his desperate extortion attempt from the previous afternoon. I knew with terrifying, absolute certainty that any attempt to aggressively defend Jada or physically intervene with the federal authorities would instantly result in his own immediate incarceration. The primal instinct for pure self-preservation completely overrode his fragile marital loyalty. Ryan violently tore his shoulders out of Jada's frantic digging grip. He did not say a single word of comfort. He did not attempt to shield her from the advancing agents. He simply took 3 massive hurried steps backward, completely abandoning her in the absolute middle of the legal battlefield. The ultimate deeply public betrayal paralyzed Jada for a crucial fraction of a second, providing the federal agents the exact opening they needed to aggressively close the remaining distance. They forcefully grabbed her flailing arms, wrenching them tightly behind her back, and slammed the heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists with a sickening snap. Her hysterical, entitled screams devolved into pathetic, gasping sobs as the cold, inescapable reality of her absolute destruction finally took permanent hold. I remained perfectly calm amidst the swirling, deafening chaos. I slowly reached into the breast pocket of my tailored charcoal suit and pulled out my polished navy cross. I carefully pinned the heavy metal medal directly back onto my lapel, the sharp pin piercing the expensive fabric of my suit. It was a silent, undeniable testament to the actual legitimate battles I had survived far away from the pathetic artificial warfare these domestic criminals had aggressively attempted to wage against me. As the federal agents forcefully dragged Judge Thorne down the center aisle and directly past the defense table, he briefly lifted his heavy head. For one final, perfectly suspended moment in time, our eyes met. I gave him absolutely nothing but a cold, devastating, entirely victorious stare. He completely broke eye contact, first dropping his head in total absolute defeat as the heavy oak doors permanently closed behind him. The suffocating tension that had gripped my life for the past month completely evaporated. The absolute destruction of their criminal enterprise did not end in that courthouse. It was only the opening salvo in a relentless, fast-paced avalanche of federal justice that ruthlessly dismantled every single aspect of their stolen lives. The fallout was incredibly swift and absolutely merciless. The federal indictment against Harrison Thorne was a masterclass in legal annihilation. He was immediately stripped of his esteemed judicial title. The state Supreme Court unanimously voted to permanently revoke his law license, publicly condemning his actions in a scathing 50-page brief. Every single corrupt ruling he had issued over the past decade was placed under intense federal review, tearing his professional legacy completely to shreds. The state pension board moved with unprecedented speed to aggressively freeze and entirely seize his lucrative retirement accounts. He was left with absolutely nothing. During his highly publicized federal sentencing hearing, the arrogant, untouchable magistrate stood trembling before a no-nonsense federal judge who possessed absolutely zero sympathy for a corrupt colleague. Thorne was handed a mandatory 15-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There was no possibility of early parole. His massive offshore accounts were completely drained by the government, the funds aggressively seized to establish a massive victim restitution fund. The powerful man who had ruthlessly attempted to steal my family home would spend the rest of his natural life confined to a concrete cell barely larger than a standard walk-in closet. Jada faced a deeply public, brutally humiliating reckoning. Her highly curated, entirely fabricated digital empire collapsed overnight. The federal prosecutors did not offer her a single plea deal. They hammered her with the absolute maximum penalties for operating a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. She was explicitly sentenced to 8 grueling years in a federal women's correctional facility. But the criminal sentence was merely a fraction of her ultimate punishment. The precise moment her federal conviction was officially handed down, an aggressive consortium of top-tier civil litigators filed a massive, incredibly vicious class action lawsuit on behalf of her thousands of defrauded victims. The civil judgment was entirely merciless. The courts ordered the immediate, complete liquidation of every single physical and digital asset she had ever purchased with her stolen money. Federal marshals systematically descended upon her massive leased penthouse apartment, physically seizing her luxury imported vehicles, her massive collection of high-end designer handbags, and her incredibly expensive jewelry. Her bank accounts were frozen and entirely emptied. Even the lucrative monetization rights to her massive social media channels were completely seized and permanently disabled. The modern, fiercely independent female empowerment icon was forcefully reduced to a completely bankrupt, heavily disgraced federal inmate wearing a standard issue orange jumpsuit. She had absolutely no makeup, no flattering ring lights, and absolutely zero followers to manipulate. The massive media narrative completely flipped overnight. The same aggressive national news outlets that had ruthlessly painted me as a violent, deeply unhinged military veteran were suddenly forced into incredibly humiliating public retractions. Primetime investigative journalists launched extensive multi-part documentary series exposing Jada's massive fraud and Thorne's systemic corruption. The highly edited, completely out of context viral videos Jada had weaponized against me were definitively debunked by independent digital forensic experts on national television. They meticulously broke down the explicit audio manipulation, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that Jada had entirely fabricated the alleged assault. The vicious online mob that had aggressively demanded my absolute destruction suddenly pivoted, redirecting their intense fury directly toward the exposed criminals. My name was completely cleared, completely washed clean by the undeniable absolute truth of the federal indictments. However, the absolute greatest victory was not simply clearing my personal reputation. It was the massive, unprecedented surge in my professional corporate valuation. The highly publicized, incredibly calculated manner in which I had systematically dismantled a powerful, deeply entrenched criminal syndicate served as the ultimate undeniable advertisement for my specialized corporate services. The top-tier executives and massive international conglomerates who closely followed the explosive trial did not view my actions as a massive personal scandal. They saw an absolute masterclass in extreme threat intelligence, flawless tactical execution, and ruthless, highly sophisticated counter-warfare. If my specialized cybersecurity firm could successfully bait a sitting judge and a highly influential public figure into completely destroying themselves on a federal stage, the corporate elite desperately wanted that exact same unyielding protection for their own massive empires. Within 48 hours of the federal arrests, my secure corporate phone lines were ringing relentlessly. Massive Fortune 500 companies that had previously hesitated to sign our premium contracts were suddenly aggressively demanding immediate meetings. Our elite corporate retainer fees tripled overnight. The official stock valuation of my specialized threat intelligence firm skyrocketed, completely shattering every single previous financial projection. The massive influx of new corporate capital allowed me to immediately expand our sophisticated operational capabilities. We aggressively hired dozens of highly specialized former intelligence officers, massively expanding our global footprint. The very same violent, highly coordinated attack that Jada and Thorne had specifically designed to bankrupt me and steal my physical family estate had directly fueled my ascension to an entirely new level of massive corporate power. They had aggressively attempted to bury me, completely failing to realize they had simply planted a highly explosive seed. The true absolute cost of their unhinged greed was not just their own permanent destruction, it was actively financing the massive, unstoppable rise of the exact man they had desperately tried to destroy. The war was officially over, and the financial spoils were completely secured. 2 weeks after the war officially ended and my financial spoils were completely secured, the profound silence inside my restored family estate was absolute perfection. I stood in the massive front window of the primary living room, holding a steaming mug of black coffee, watching a highly professional landscaping crew meticulously maintain the expansive front lawn. The heavy, suffocating shadow of Judge Thorne and Jada Brooks had been permanently scrubbed from the physical property. The house finally felt entirely clean. My secure corporate smartphone vibrated sharply against the polished mahogany side table, shattering the morning tranquility. I glanced down at the glowing digital screen. The incoming caller identification displayed an unregistered prepaid cellular number. Given the massive, unprecedented surge in high-level corporate inquiries my security firm was currently experiencing, I casually swiped the green icon and brought the device to my ear, fully expecting another desperate Fortune 500 chief executive asking for immediate consultation. Instead, I heard the ragged, completely pathetic sound of heavy, desperate weeping. Declan, please do not hang up this phone, a broken, violently trembling voice begged. It was Ryan. The sound of my older brother's voice did not trigger a massive spike of anger or a sudden rush of fraternal adrenaline. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. He sounded entirely destroyed. The aggressive, arrogant tone he had confidently wielded during his illegal extortion attempt just a month ago had completely vanished. He sounded exactly like a cornered animal completely out of options. I remained perfectly silent, letting his desperate, gasping breaths fill the empty digital space between us. I have absolutely nothing left, Declan, Ryan sobbed, his voice cracking violently under the massive weight of his total ruin. The federal authorities froze all of our joint banking accounts. They seized the leased luxury cars. They legally evicted me from the massive penthouse yesterday afternoon. I slept on a dirty public bench at the central bus station last night. Jada's high-priced defense lawyers completely threw me under the bus to save their own reputations. The state prosecutors are officially drafting felony accessory charges against me right now for my active involvement in the financial extortion. I am looking at a minimum of 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary. He paused, desperately waiting for me to offer a single shred of familial sympathy or a sudden miraculous rescue. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee, my eyes tracking a landscaping tractor moving methodically across my pristine green lawn. I have nowhere else to turn, Ryan continued, his tone growing incredibly frantic as my prolonged silence violently amplified his rapidly escalating panic. My former corporate colleagues will not even return my desperate emails. My supposed friends completely blocked my number the exact second the massive federal indictments hit the national evening news. You are the only person who can actually fix this massive disaster. You have massive high-level government connections now. Your specialized security firm is making millions. You have top-tier corporate lawyers on retainer. Please, Declan, you have to help me. You have to protect your older brother. We are blood, and blood is thicker than water. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his desperate plea was almost physically impressive. He had aggressively participated in a highly coordinated, incredibly vicious criminal conspiracy to falsely imprison me, completely bankrupt me, and illegally steal the exact family estate I was currently standing inside. He had gleefully bet on my absolute destruction, fully expecting to reap the massive financial rewards of my carefully planned downfall. And now, standing completely naked in the harsh, unforgiving blast radius of his own catastrophic failure, he was aggressively attempting to weaponize the exact same family bond he had so easily discarded. I slowly set my ceramic coffee mug down on the polished mahogany table. The sharp click of the ceramic hitting the solid wood echoed loudly through the quiet, peaceful room. Listen to me very carefully, Ryan. I said, my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of any emotion whatsoever. You are fundamentally misunderstanding the basic concept of family. You genuinely think genetic relation is an automatic free pass for massive, unforgivable betrayal. You think sharing the exact same last name absolutely guarantees a permanent safety net when your own vicious greed completely blows up in your face. Declan, please. I was heavily manipulated, Ryan cried out desperately, attempting to shift the absolute blame away from himself. Jada completely poisoned my mind. I was not thinking clearly at all. I cut him off immediately, my voice dropping into a cold, highly lethal register. You were not manipulated. You are a fully grown adult who made a highly calculated, incredibly malicious choice. You saw a golden opportunity to aggressively accelerate your own wealthy lifestyle by completely destroying my life. You recorded that extortion call yourself. You explicitly demanded a massive financial payout to make a fabricated assault charge disappear. You were perfectly willing to let me rot in a concrete federal prison cell so you could live in a luxury penthouse and drive an imported sports car. I took a slow, steady breath, permanently locking away any remaining trace of the brother I used to know. Blood just means we have the same parents. Loyalty is what makes a family. You chose your side. I am so incredibly sorry. Ryan sobbed, his voice devolving into an incoherent, highly pathetic wail that echoed through the small speaker of my phone. I will do absolutely anything. I will publicly apologize to the entire world. I will work for your security firm for free. Just please do not let me go to a state prison. I will not survive in there. You are going to have to figure out how to survive entirely on your own. I replied coldly, completely unmoved by his massive display of extreme terror. Because the absolute undeniable reality of the situation is that you placed a massive bet against my life, and you completely lost. I am not your personal savior. I am not your family. I am simply the man who survived your vicious, unprovoked attack. Declan, wait, I am begging you, do not ever contact me again. I pulled the digital smartphone away from my ear and pressed the red button, instantly terminating the active connection with extreme prejudice. The heavy, frantic sobbing was immediately replaced by the absolute pristine silence of my secure family home. I tapped the glass screen 3 more times, permanently blocking his unregistered prepaid cellular number across my entire encrypted corporate network. The heavy, rotting dead weight of my deeply toxic past was officially and permanently severed. I picked up my hot coffee, turned my back on the massive front window, and walked confidently into my high-tech home office to conquer the rest of my life. I walked straight through my high-tech home office, successfully completed my morning security briefings with my newly expanded executive team, and finally stepped out through the heavy sliding glass doors into the expansive backyard of my fully restored family estate. The late afternoon sun was incredibly warm and brilliantly golden, casting long, deeply peaceful shadows across the meticulously manicured green lawn. A gentle breeze rustled through the massive century-old oak trees that proudly lined the heavily secured perimeter of my private property. For the very first time since I officially returned home from my overseas military deployments, my physical body felt entirely relaxed. The heavy, suffocating tension that had tightly coiled around my spine for the past several months was completely gone. I walked slowly across the massive stone patio, the expensive leather of my shoes completely silent against the polished slate. I was standing in the exact center of the beautiful home my parents had worked their entire lives to build, and I had successfully defended it against the absolute worst kind of human parasites. The incredibly toxic elements that had aggressively attempted to infect my life were now completely and permanently eradicated. Jada was currently sitting in a cold concrete federal prison cell, entirely stripped of her fake digital empire and her stolen luxury goods. Judge Thorne was permanently disgraced and securely locked away for the rest of his natural life, his massive offshore accounts completely drained to absolute zero by the federal government. My own brother was completely homeless and currently facing massive felony charges, entirely abandoned by the criminal syndicate he had so eagerly served. I had systematically and surgically removed every single one of them from my existence with extreme, highly calculated prejudice. In their absolute absence, my own personal empire was rapidly expanding at an unprecedented, incredibly explosive rate. I was heavily protected, financially untouchable, and completely in control of my own ultimate destiny. Standing there in the beautiful, undisturbed silence of my secure private sanctuary, I took a long moment to deeply reflect on the massive, highly publicized war I had just decisively won. We currently live in a highly chaotic modern society that aggressively rewards the absolute loudest voices in the room. People like Jada and Harrison Thorne completely thrived on highly performative noise. They genuinely believed that massive digital follower counts, aggressive courtroom shouting, and highly fabricated public outrage were the ultimate forms of modern power. They aggressively used their loud, entirely fake narratives to rapidly intimidate and forcefully crush anyone who dared to stand in their way. They looked at my quiet, intensely private nature and instantly assumed I was an incredibly weak, heavily traumatized target they could easily exploit for massive financial gain. They made a catastrophic, entirely fatal miscalculation. They completely failed to understand that true, undeniable strength has absolutely nothing to do with aggressively yelling the loudest or desperately demanding immediate public attention. True strength is absolute, unbreakable silence. It is the extreme tactical discipline to completely hold your ground and keep your mouth shut while your vicious enemies violently overextend themselves. It is the raw, terrifying capability to watch a massive, highly coordinated attack coming directly at you, completely understand the intricate mechanics of that specific threat, and quietly rewire their own trap to violently detonate right in their faces. I did not have to aggressively scream my innocence to the vicious digital mobs. I did not have to actively engage in their highly dramatic, incredibly toxic public theater. I simply stepped back, securely gathered my undeniable digital forensics, and quietly allowed them to aggressively dig their own massive graves.